Okay.
Cool.
I think it's going to work.
Awesome.
See, Mary, you're all I need.
Well, I unfortunately can't stay. I'm sad to miss it.
No, that's okay. Thank you so much for logging on real quick.
No problem. Have a great event.
Thank you.
Everyone.
I take it that spacing issues happened before, but it's good. Now I know just in case.
Kevin, you're on the entire time, maybe not like, right? And so at the end, we're gonna do some Q&A. If you see questions in the chat throughout it, I'm definitely not gonna get to them. I'm totally gonna miss them. So I'm gonna pull up a Word document, maybe throw a few on the side. And when we get to the Q&A, if you see any that are particularly good, if you could just feed them to me directly through the chat, at that point, I'll pull up my chat and that way you can help me out here.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what, since kind of have you to help moderate and lead the discussion, I'm here to kind of support, and that's a great idea. So thanks for mentioning ahead of time.
Yeah. And I mean, I know you have my cell phone number. So for any reason, like, also I know Carmel is joining, but if there are any other like alums, especially distinguished alums,
The YouTube channel and those kinds of things, but hopefully folks will be able to circle back and watch it later on as well.
Yeah, I'm hoping we can maybe blast this out in an email or something, especially since we're still, we have plenty of weeks left in the month, and it's great content. I think that's, again, from my perspective on the industry, right now you're competing against so much multimedia that, singular snapshot posts are really hard to remain competitive. You need content that people want to consume and be educated and put something up for an hour while they're cooking, or, their capacity to actually like engage and ask questions and be present is very low.
So.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Does anyone else see Brandon Rivera's name on my?
Oh, yes, that's because I sent you the direct link. And so.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Anyone who has my link is twinning me this morning. Feel free to change your name back to your what's on your ID or whatever you go by is best. But yes, I think we're on our 5th club.
I mean, that's my honor and privilege.
I'll give it about another minute here, and then we'll get started. But in that minute, first off, I want to thank all of you for joining us here. As folks begin to trickle in a little bit, just a little bit of housekeeping at the top. Obviously, being Zoom call, if you could please keep your microphones on mute. If you have any questions during our presentation, we will have a question and answer period at the end, and really love to get to some of those core topics. So feel free to use the chat to get a hold of us. Kevin is going to do a great job of filtering those things. And like I said, at the end of the conversation, you can either direct them to me or preferably one of our great and distinguished experts here with us today. All that being said, again, thanking you all for being here. This is an incredibly important topic as we celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month. As many of you have heard, the announcement came on April 2021 that NAU had attained its Hispanic Serving Institution status by meeting the criteria as dictated by the Hispanic Associations of Colleges and Universities. This designation denotes that a college or university's Latinx enrollment makes up 25% of its total enrollment and recognizes the diversity of the population on campus. As a result of our distinction, NAU will have greater access to grants, including Title V, which provides opportunities and funds to expand education attainment for Latinx students. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge that Northern Arizona University sits at the base of the San Francisco Peaks on homeland sacred to Native Americans throughout the region. We honor their past, present, and future generations who have lived here for millennia and will forever call this place home. As someone based in San Diego, I thank these same people for my appreciation of the Kumeyaay land that I now live on and the resources given to me through these sacred lands. I also want to thank our NAU-TEN group of recent graduates of the last 10 years and the Alumni Association staff for all of their work putting this event together. It goes without saying that your support in these matters is just as pivotal as anybody else's, and your involvement is something that's going to be pivotal to getting us to that next level. We are incredibly lucky here today. We have a star lineup of experts from the different corners of campus, and I really couldn't be more excited to get to the meat of this conversation. We have Vidal Mendoza, Assistant Director of Hispanic and Latinx Initiatives, Nancy Navarro, Assistant Director of Diversity Recruitment, Dr. T. Mark Montoya, Director and Assistant Professor of Ethnic Studies, Becca Alvarado, Assistant Director, First Generation Programs, and last but not least, Jessica Velasquez, Assistant Director, Housing and Residence Life. Special thanks to all of you for your time, putting it out here, like, as I said earlier, for keeping Latinx alum top of mind and contributing to our success in these DEI programs that NAU has going on. Let us root the conversation today with a little history on what HSIs are, how they came to be, and where we are today. The distinction of HSI is inherently rooted in activism and advocacy by our academic forebears in the 1970s. In 1979, a group of 8 advocacy groups came together and formed the Hispanic Higher Education Coalition. This group advocated for federal support of what they then called Hispanic colleges and testified during the reauthorization periods of the Higher Education Act in the 1980s. Also in the 1980s and during a similar time, a group of leaders at institutions that enrolled high numbers of Latinx students came together to raise awareness of the needs of their institutions and formed the NAU, Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities, was commonly referred to as HACU. HACU is still alive and well today, promoting the needs of the Latinx community and higher education. It was this organization that coined the term Hispanic Serving Institution at their very first conference in the 1980s and solidified the percentage requirement in 1992. However, it was not until 1998 that the HSI program was codified into law under a separate section of the Higher Education Act known as Title V. According to the US Department of Education, the HSI status under Title V gives institutions the ability to apply for grant-style funding for several items from endowment funds, faculty development, student services, retention, transfer support, and various other programs. They also publish a full list of projects submitted across the country by different institutions for everyone to review. I highly recommend everyone visit that webpage and look at these projects to see what exactly different institutions are trying to do to address the educational attainment gap. So where are we today? HSIs educate over 5 million undergraduate and graduate students across the country. There are currently 569 registered HSIs, with approximately 30 different institutions joining annually. HSIs recently came back into the national political discourse last week with Senator Alex Padilla of California and Senator Bob Menendez of New Jersey forming the Senate HSI caucus. The House had formed their similar version of the caucus in 2017 under the leadership of Representatives Joaquin Castro, Raul Grijalva, Maria Diaz-Balart, and Jennifer Gonzalez Colon. As you probably guessed, these caucuses were formed because there's still a lot of work to be done. A 2020 article by the Center of American Progress paints a hopeful and yet grim picture of the current state of Latinx population in higher education. Surprisingly to me, Latinx enrollment in higher education outpaces their really astronomical increase in the general population percentage, meaning that even for as much as the Latinx population has grown in the United States in the last 10 years, their attainment or their involvement in higher education is even higher than that. However, roughly only a quarter of all of those Latinx students who start higher education graduate with a bachelor's degree. According to the same article, a $1 billion investment at the federal level is needed to begin to close the education gap for the 2.5 million Latinx enrolled students in higher education. To get a little more specific than that, closing the gap would mean that the funds available to Latinx students would be about half the rate of what the HBCU system can provide. And obviously there is lots of differentiations between the HSI system and the HBCU system, and it is not to make an apples to apples comparison, but the HBCU system is able to contribute roughly $1,600 per student. In comparison, all of the current funding for HSI programming only allows for an $87 contribution per student. So what do we do? First off, again, this is not unique to the HSI program. There are plenty of other ethnic demographics who undergo similar challenges. We definitely want to acknowledge that and acknowledge that we all could use more support. However, it is this exigency that provides the context for our discussion today. It is a celebration of what we have accomplished, but also an acknowledgement of the work that is yet to be done. This is also a very condensed history of the program that clearly does not do justice to the decades of struggles that it has taken to create the program, to maintain the program, and to propel this discourse amongst our national conversation. Along those lines, it would be appropriate for me to acknowledge at this point the differences in terms between Hispanic and Latinx, where we were when the program originated and where many colleges and universities are today. In the interest of brevity, I'll say this. In the first ever Ni de Aquí podcast hosted by Arizonan Wiso Vasquez and professional soccer player for America, Yaneli Farias, they interviewed a Harvard University PhD candidate, Miguel Angel Vasquez. Miguel does a wonderful job of giving a much more in-depth history on the political origins of Hispanic, the transition in the early 2000s to Latino, and a more recently accepted efforts for the inclusion of Latinx. Without diving too far into the weeds, the podcast challenged some of my cultural beliefs about origins that I held and solidified, and it solidified my decision to call folks Latinx in an effort to create a more inclusive environment, especially for queer members of our community who have been historically pushed to the margins instead of the center of our focus. Looking at it from the alumni perspective, I am grateful that NAU has adopted the term since I left campus and is taking the steps to create a community built by all and for all. With that context, I want to now transition to pose some questions to our distinguished experts. Before I say that, it goes without saying that none of the efforts and initiatives on campus happen without people. It is the collective effort of people that drive these things on campus and make these things go round. All of our panelists today are alums of the institution. And one of the things that has really inspired me as of late of NAU is their acknowledgement of the transformative capacity of higher education. As we hear from these folk, I just want to put that out there to our audience of how NAU has transformed all of our lives and the fact that we have all participated in this higher education structure. The fact that these folks are really now at the spear front of what we're doing across campus, and want to acknowledge that as the forefront of why they're here today, why they have volunteered their time to share some of their insights with alumni. So my first question is for Vidal. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Vidal, you're Assistant Director of Hispanic and Latinx Outreach in our Office of Inclusion, Multicultural, LGBTQIA Student Services. Could you tell us a little bit about the initiatives you work on for the Latinx students?
Yes, thank you for having me, Brandon. What do? I do a lot. What I do, so I believe I am the only one on campus whose main job description encompasses Hispanic and Latino, Latinx initiatives. So when I came into this role, I came in during COVID, which was really tough. I came with a very general job description, and I was just told to kind of build from that. So I definitely hit the ground running, and historically, the Office of Inclusion is a lot of programming, a lot of events. Well, when I came in, I was like, I want to approach this more holistically, because during a pandemic, Hispanic Latinx students do not need programming. I can try to plan programming, but do they truly need that? So when I came in, I definitely talked to the students, attended their club meetings, virtual club meetings, talked to campus partners, and just truly listened to what they need and what they need at that moment. And a lot of it was one-on-one student support. So I do provide a lot of one-on-one student support. Make sure that they are connected to the right campus resources, whether it's our academic success center or whether it's our counseling services. But right now, currently, we are at 5,500 students who identify Hispanic, Latino, Latinx. One person to help keep them here on campus is not enough, Brandon. I mean, some days I'm 9 to 9. I work 12 hours a day. And, you know, in true Hispanic Latinx culture, it takes a village. So I will be reaching out to T Mark, or I will be reaching out to Jessica. I will be reaching out to Nancy. Nancy was just here the other night helping me call out Loteria cards for our Loteria game for Hispanic Heritage Month. Or I will reach out to Becca, because Becca works with first-gen programs, and there is so much intersectionality with students who are Hispanic, Latinx, and also being first-gen. So it really takes, it truly takes a village. And, you know, culturally, my leadership style is heavily embedded in my Latina heritage. And I know when I was a student here at NAU, I think I met Dr. Camacho, and Dr. Camacho is no longer here, but I was like, oh my gosh, who are you? What do you do here? What is your role here? And not just that, how did you get here? How did you handle these obstacles, these barriers? Because I saw someone that looked like me, and it was like the second person, and I was already like in my senior year, that looked like me. And I try not to overextend us. I know T Mark's like, why did you come to me, Vidal? I'm like, because I know you're busy. So, and I'm hoping from this talk, that's what we can get more, is a lot of more collaboration.
You know, thank you so much for that insight, because you're right. You know, coming out of COVID is an entirely different situation and when we left. And you know, for those of you joining us, Vidal wrote an incredible piece, and I'm talking incredible piece about her experiences as a student, and shared, you know, her 5 feelings that, you know, I read the piece, and so I can kind of feel where you're coming from. You talk about the village, and that is just a concept that I would like to touch on a little bit here more. And I think one of the impetuses for this conversation, right, is, and one of my questions to you, you know, the Alumni Association recently, you know, alerted us on the board, at least, that the Thrive grant is available for our student population to use for event planning that creates some of these bridges we're talking about with community, linking students with the much needed one-on-one resources in alumni. That being said, how else, you know, with your position close to these students, how else do you think alumni, specifically those of us who are geographically challenged, maybe like in San Diego or other places, how can we connect? What can we do to be some of that support system and almost in an organic fashion where students feel comfortable, which is not even going through that, right? But they're just like, I know Brandon, I'm gonna go send them an email. What can we do to create that environment?
So I was recently at an assessment meeting, and I saw a study on currently how students of color, the academic effort is higher than the degree retention. That was a red flag for me. And it's like, they are here, they are trying, but they are not graduating. And what can we do? And it was kind of like, okay, go back to your departments and see what more can you do. And it's like, I don't know if I could do any more. I could sleep here. But and when it comes to HSI, I've been doing a lot of research, heavily grant, you know, what is this? We are able to apply for all this extra funding. I am not a grant writer, but I did attend the student affairs side, and I was like, can anybody share any grants that we have applied for? And I was really discouraged because nobody knew of any grants that people are, and we've been HSI since April. So how are we going to keep our HSI title if nobody is seizing that opportunity. So any alumni who have grant writing experience, please share it with me, because if I have to start, I am ready to start. Anybody who wants to start with me, let's learn how to write grants. And it's hard because for me, I'm sitting here with the students one-on-one, day in and day out, and hearing what they need. And I feel like if I'm not at the conversation, then that means they are not at the conversation.
I really appreciate that very specific request too, because we do have a lot of alums who would love to donate their time in these types of resources. And like I said, for those of you who don't have more awareness of the program, again, HSI is a little different than some other distinctions. There is no funding automatically given to an institution because of their status as an HSI. All of the funding that comes from HSI is a grant style funding, which means that HSIs are essentially pitted against one another for the types of projects that they present to the federal government. And there is large questions about how much the funding has been adjusted for inflation since the creation of the program, and really the significance of these programs given the limited funding. And so I think that's what Vidal speaks to, is that we do have great opportunity for a lot of these student success style grant funds. And there is a really good opportunity there too, to build a lot of bridges, right? We can build a bridge where we can connect alumni to maybe volunteer some of their time, but also keeping in mind our students, right? That them having the opportunity to have that input with alumni and create some of really that job experience would be an amazing opportunity. And again, Vidal, like you said, and I connected with you earlier, just thank you so much for the time, energy, and effort that you give to our students. I know that there are plenty of people who are going to watch this that know someone like you who just changed the course and the trajectory, because you're right, it is about the context. We can pour all the money we want into tutoring, but if sometimes it does take that person who just understands where you are coming from to make you feel comfortable, and also acknowledging that a lot of our students are really far from home for the very first time in their life. And so thank you for creating La Comunidad and for contributing here today. I want to transition to Nancy at this time, especially with the comments. Now, Nancy, I was so impressed when I read about your bilingual outreach and holding the first ever Spanish presentation for our prospective students. I wish this could go without saying, but it does have to be said, that Spanish language outreach has been proven to bridge many of the gaps created in politics, healthcare, education, and so many other sectors. There is no replacement for a multi-language approach to any sector we're looking to reach out to the Latinx population. One comment that you made in the article that I read about your program that really stuck with me is going to college is a decision made by the entire Latinx family. To me, that is a very natural statement. And I think I understand that through my lived experience. But for those who may not come from our similar background, could you explain how that may differ than, let's say, a third generation lumberjack?
Yeah, absolutely. I myself am a first generation, and it was a really interesting path to navigate. My parents were immigrants. They came here and were picking lettuce in the lettuce capital in Yuma. And so for them, you know, raising 3 children and having 2 of their daughters go to college, they really didn't know what to do. My father barely finished 7th grade. My mother finished some of high school, but did not get to finish high school. And so they didn't know how to help me. So it was just kind of having to navigate that whole process by myself, and being able to understand everything. And the weight of financial aid is so hard when they can't help. Not that they didn't want to, but they just didn't know how to. And then, you know, seeing kind of different methods that my cousins and other friends have gone through where they are 2nd or 3rd generation. There's still some obstacles, there's still some confusion, but they usually have now that person who has some frame of reference of what they should do, how they can apply, what options to look at. Seeing my little cousin here at NAU now, and her being 2nd generation, has been a little bit different of a process, but it's been great to see it. I have another cousin that goes to another state institution. He's 3rd generation. And for him, it was mom did everything because mom knew what to do. So it's been very different just kind of seeing that. But again, no matter what path the student is on, they're always going to have obstacles, they're always going to have challenges. And having folks like Becca, Vidal, T-Mark that I can connect them to, I really appreciate being able to say like, hey, this student needs this, can they talk to you? But I think it's just not having that capacity to help your child, your student, is really hard for parents. So one thing that I know I try to do is I say, do you want to have a meeting? You and I'll tell you what to tell your student and how to support your student. And then you'll be prepared for when they come to you with that question. There's many folks in this university who have also helped me prepare parents to have conversations with their students. So I will try to, offer that opportunity for them, is tell me your questions so that I can prepare you.
To that end, do you feel that the trust factor, and I bring this up because I think it goes without saying that we are a traditional campus in that students come to campus, a lot of them from the Valley, a lot of them from the Tucson area. And so do you feel that trust dynamic between the family and us as an institution at NAU, sometimes a little bit more foreign to them realistically, because they're geographically closer to our other two, cousin campuses. Do you think that trust level goes up when they have that kind of resource? Do you think, what could you comment about their comfort level and how they see us?
Absolutely. Trust is important, not only with our Latinx community, but also with our Indigenous community and other communities. We work really hard to build that trust. What I always say is I'm trying to make sure that I'm gaining that family's trust, that their child is safe here, that their child will have support and resources here. So it is a huge piece of that college going decision, is to gain trust from the family and be able to establish their home away from home. At the end of the day, I think I stress that more than anything is creating a community here, creating a home away from home, because that's what's going to make students feel comfortable, but it's also what's going to make their families feel comfortable that they do have a second home here. So family is important. They need to have a family here. And, we try to build that with at least admissions and then Vidal and everyone else that we work with.
So focusing also just on that admissions process, right? Our status is reliant on enrollment and the percentage of enrollment, and we can have a conversation about that. And what I believe is the NAU is taking this to another level, to a level other institutions have. But specifically to the enrollment status, two questions. Do we have strategies in place to make sure that we don't lose our status? And secondly, do we benefit from our local geography? Are we in a situation where there's a higher percentage of Latinx population? And really the question is, how do we get them to match here at the higher education level?
Yeah, so I will say that we continue to grow everything that we were doing to make sure that HSI continues to happen for us. A few years ago, like you said, we hosted the first info session. I always say I kind of went rogue, made my own flyers, did my own thing, and had the support of my supervisor at the time to do that. And then it just kind of picked up, and we do so much more. Just tomorrow, we're going to have NA Unity Day, which does celebrate different cultures on campus. We're going to, invite students that are 9th through 12th grade, and we are going to celebrate, obviously, the HSI status we earned. Saturday specifically, one of my staff members will be doing a Spanish info session in Phoenix to make sure that she's sharing all that NAU offers to Spanish-speaking families. We continue to offer those sessions throughout the state of Arizona, sometimes in California as well. We also always offer orientation options in Spanish. This summer, we did 3 orientation sessions in Spanish with the help of Ismael Peraza over in financial aid. We also are working on some big projects. One in particular that I get to work on is working on a landing page in Spanish. It will not be the whole website, but at least a landing page so that we can have the general about NAU information for families to understand what NAU is about. Because my goal is, yes, I understand we have the expectation that the students who come here speak English, but again, we need their families to know that NAU has their backs. And that's why I want to have at least a landing page in Spanish for them to understand what we offer and who we are. And then just continue offering events throughout different communities. Specifically with the demographics, we travel through many other states, New Mexico, California, Texas. I specifically work with El Paso, Texas. As a Spanish speaker, we just felt that that was a great area for me to be in. We have folks in California that we get a lot of students from California from that are also Latinx or Hispanic. So a lot of our recruitment is throughout the entire nation, not just Arizona. And I think that's why we do so well of having about 34% of our students coming from out of state. And with our Western Undergraduate Exchange Program, it makes it super affordable for those students to do that. And we just have a rich culture in Arizona anyway. So it's a great place to be. And in Northern Arizona, as you all know, it's a very welcoming space. And we have such a great melting pot that it makes it really easy to talk about that community here.
Thank you so much for your comments. And yes, right here, Southern California, transplant to Flagstaff, and like you said, it's a welcoming environment. Si hay comunidad, and you can find people and place for you to fit in. I want to take some time now to ask some questions of Dr. T. Mark Montoya. Full disclosure, T. Mark Montoya, you and I have the longest relationship amongst any of the panelists. You are my teacher, my faculty advisor. You put my sarapistol on my shoulders when I graduated, and to this day remain an incredibly close friend. With all the things that I've seen you do around campus, sometimes I feel like folks are sleeping on the amazing work you are doing on the publishing end. One of your more recent publications discusses borderland pedagogy and its uses in the classroom to inspire critical thinking. How do you think our new HSI status changes the metaphorical borderlands of campus? And does it influence your pedagogy in the classroom?
Thank you so much, Brandon, for that. I'm not ready to cry this early in the morning, even though it's not that early. And thanks for saying that folks are sleeping on my publications, because I'm like, yeah, I agree. No one's ever citing anything that I write, but that's absolutely fine as well. If you don't mind, I want to offer some positionality before I get to that question of borderlands. T. Mark Montoya, he, him, his, coming from the indigenous lands of what is now known as Flagstaff, Arizona, where Black Lives Matter and Queer Lives exist. And in terms of furthering this positionality, I'm associate professor and director of the Ethnic Studies program here at NAU, an alum of Northern Arizona University in Politics and International Affairs, PhD 2009. I am a first generation college student, and similar to Nancy, I'm actually a first generation high school student. My parents did not complete high school either. Depending on the situation, I am Hispanic, I am Latino, I am Latinx, I'm Mexican, I am Chicano, I am brown-ish. And I say all of this to speak about this idea of, as you asked, borderlands pedagogy and how this connects to this larger idea of Hispanic serving institutions. The borderlands are not only observed, they are lived. And I'm borrowing that direct quote from Gloria Anzalua, one of my favorite Chicana feminist borderlands scholars, who said that in 1987. And what I'm getting at here is borderlands are this idea of being bordered. In other words, there's a sort of emphasis on focusing on geopolitical borders, right? The border between the United States and Mexico, the border between the United States and Canada, France and Spain, or whatever. And when we look at borderlands and understand that they are a lived experience, what I'm talking about here, borrowing from Gloria Anzalua, is this idea that folks are navigating multiple borderlands in their everyday lives, whether they are gendered, sexual, racial, ethnic, first-gen status, and so on and so forth. In other words, folks have to live and do live a particular experience that is theirs alone. But when we look at this idea that folks are navigating multiple borderlands, we also see that in terms of bringing in the pedagogy into it, which is the method or practice of teaching and learning, is that we can use the borderlands then to frame the stories that we tell, the concepts we draw upon, the way we frame the world, the general pedagogical experiences that we can offer. So what I get here in this particular article that you're referring to that's called Unlearning Racism is that the classroom should not exist in isolation. It needs to be connected to the larger community. And it is when we look at our own community, particularly looking at Latinx identities, is that it is often connected to that community. And I think that's one of the things that the institution itself often forgets, is that sort of connection with family, with community, with the larger us, if you will. And because the classroom doesn't exist in isolation, we have to take on this dual task of not only in the classroom creating new objects of knowledge, but also in addressing how racism is rooted in basic institutional structures. And once we acknowledge that, we can start to prepare our students as citizens, right? The thing is that citizenship is not a neutral concept, right? We often overlook the way it's constructed, and more importantly, we often overlook who gets to construct that definition, who counts and who doesn't, and why. So unlearning racism necessitates anti-racism, not non-racism, right? In other words, it's not enough to be non-racist, you have to be anti-racist. And borderlands pedagogy, as I write in this particular article, lends itself to a conscious decolonization of academia, and consequently a decolonization of what we call citizenship itself. So it I think brings up a lot of interesting points in how we can sort of start to navigate these particular identities and start to really pay attention to the function of rethinking the university itself.
Yeah, and you know, I was a beneficiary of these programs, and you're the one who really taught me this, right? You recommended this book, Becoming a Hispanic Serving Institution by Garcia, right? And parts of that book are really a whole scale criticism, but also this context that, as we said, like there is the grant funding part of it, but there's the serving part of it. And I know through the Ethnic Studies department, as a student of the department, y'all have done a lot to serve the students. You've created Hip Hop Week. You've empowered us to potentially create our own courses. Just could you comment about what you think the spirit at NAU of service is? Is it that folks such as yourselves really commit yourself to that service? I know community is one part, but what else do you think makes those gears turn, those wheels turn? How do we get this service element to that next stage?
Yeah, and it goes back to this question: is what does it mean to be an HSI, which I would suggest is actually very different and not necessarily comparable to HBCUs, in the sense that HBCUs were built with a very specific purpose in mind, whereas an HSI is a predominantly white institution that happens to have a significant percentage of Hispanics, which leads to this larger question, right? Obviously, or a bunch of larger questions. This is what happens with me when I ask a question, I start asking more questions, is like, what does it mean to be Hispanic? What are these other identities? How does this particular identity erase identities that are themselves important, right? In other words, what I'm getting at here is that Hispanic is not a monolith. We're not homogeneous. It's not a static identity. It's one that has been utilized in so many ways to often erase people from that particular identity as well. Hispanics, Latinos, Latinx folks can be Black, they can be Asian, they can be white, and so on, but there's often still a privileging of identities that erase the other more minoritized identities there as well. And what I'm getting at here is that predominantly white institutions were not built for Hispanics or for other minoritized others, which leads us to this question of why the status is and can be important, right? And you mentioned this, there are grants, there's funding, and then there's somebody like me who offers theory and puts that in there as well. And when we recently achieved this 25 percentage, which may seem strange for being in a border state in the Southwest, in Arizona, right? But there are historical reasons for this as well. I mean, for those of you who understand the history of the creation of the state of Arizona and the breaking away from the state of New Mexico, it was rooted in white supremacy. And it was rooted in separating a predominantly white population from predominantly so-called Hispanic, Hispano population of New Mexico. So when we look at, for example, folks who are challenging voting rights, or states that are challenging voting rights, we see that they are former slave states, and where Arizona, right, which is not a former slave state per se. So again, there's a lot of very, very interesting historical nature. So what does it mean to serve? And this is the thing I say all the time, is I am so much more interested in the S and not the H, right? HSI. I am interested in that S. How do we serve our students? And again, I think we need to deal with systemic issues, right? Institutional issues. We have to self-reflect. We have to investigate our own privileges. We have to decenter ourselves. We have to be willing to make mistakes and to sometimes so-called fail. We have to understand that it's going to take a lot of discussion, discomfort, but it's not here for our comfort. It's if it's difficult, then we're probably doing it right. And what I'm getting at here is this sort of idea that in order to serve our Hispanic, Latinx, Latina population, we're really serving the entirety of our population. We say this in our first gen programs at NAU as well, is that best practices for first gen students are best practices for all students. In other words, we have to be very mindful of how we can move the dynamic forward to not only serve a specific population, but to also serve the larger entirety of NAU as well. And we do this, I think, by not only visibility, but also acknowledgement, right? Acknowledgement of the idea that the reason why it took so long for us to achieve this 25%, this 25 percentage, is that Arizona itself has a particular political climate that goes back through history that accounts for why Hispanics in the state, while they are significant in population, I believe the Arizona Hispanic population is about 32%, still remains quite invisible in so many ways compared to other border states and so on. And to get to this point as well, is that the Arizona population is indeed about 32% for the Arizona Hispanic population is 32%. Right. The Hispanic population in Department of Corrections, so prisons and jails, is 42%. And the university population is about 24%. So if we're living in this so-called equitable society, then arguably the Hispanic population, obviously 32%, would also be the same for the TOC. It would also be the same for the university populations as well.
And
so
that's why, and not to cut you off, but
no,
that is a such a critical component of it, right? Mm-hmm. A couple of things that you said that really stick out to me. One is that we cannot be afraid to fail. And I think that is so important as we continue to do this work, to acknowledge that we are going to fail, that we will come up short, and that we will not always attain all of our goals, but that is not the point. The point is to aspire. And the other important thing, and this is why I loved all of your classes, we cannot ignore the history and the positionality of our community. We cannot ignore that within our community, we experience different things, that our community has a higher contact to incarcerated folks than maybe other demographics, that there are just lived experiences that we go through. And so, like you said, the focus should be on the S, the service. And I love that we got to this point of the conversation, because there's so much that so many people across campus do to serve that can't be measured in an enrollment statistic, but doesn't make it any less important. Right? Just because you aren't necessarily doing the work to bring those people onto campus doesn't mean it's not happening. It doesn't mean that you're not a driving contributor to why these folks decide to stay. Now, you mentioned first generation programs, and I think that's a really great segue to me asking some questions of Becca. Becca, you are the assistant director for our first gen programs. And I was just wondering, how does the HSI status impact your programs? Does it change them? Does it help them? If you could talk to us about what this means for the work that you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely, Brandon. And I feel like with your experience in ethnic studies and knowing T-Mark for so long, T-Mark also gave me my sash at Convocation. He was an incredible mentor to me and as well. And so I feel like our paths might have crossed at some point in time in ethnic studies. And so I think that that's such a really important question. And I want to preface by sharing a little bit about my experience. So as an assistant director within first generation programs, particularly for the TRIO Student Support Services program, I myself am not first generation. I am a product of my mom's first generation status. And so my mom actually came to NAU many years ago. She lived in Cowden on campus, and then she took a break, and her short break turned into about 20 or so years. And she ended up returning to NAU to finish out her dual degree in special education and elementary education when I was in high school. And so I, in high school, had the opportunity to see my mom walk across that graduation stage. And I, in turn, a number of years later, wore her same cap and gown when I walked across the graduation stage at NAU. And so I am a product of a first generation non-traditional student who went from community college to NAU, had that break, and then came back to NAU and finished up that degree. And so I think when you focus on how the HSI status can be beneficial for our first generation student programming, I think first and foremost, it brings more visibility to our programming. It brings more visibility to the necessity for there to be a first generation programs at the university, considering the number of Hispanic and Latinx, Latine, and identifying students on our campus. I think it also allows us to be more intentional in our programming. And so what I mean by that is at the beginning of our time together, Vidal shared about the importance of recognizing intersectionality with our student populations. And that is something to me that is so important, to be able to create programming that is intentional to recognizing our students' many overlapping identities, and understanding that one does not overpower another, that our students are complex students, they're complex individuals. Like Nancy shared, they have family expectations that they are meeting up to. They have work expectations because of the cost of university. They have their academic institutions because I have a number of first generation students who it's like they have so many academic commitments because it's almost like a sense to having to prove themselves, because I'm here, I'm first generation, and I'm going to prove that I am owning my space and that I almost deserve to be here, which I feel like I've felt that from a lot of my first generation students, the student staff that are within my office, and also our peer mentor staff and our participants in our programs. And so I think that status allows us to be more intentional. And then finally, I think, again, returning to one of Vidal's comments was that it takes a village. I am also a believer that it takes a village to support students. And I think that HSI status just lends an additional opportunity to collaborate with Vidal, for instance, and with T-Mark and with Nancy Navarro as we work to not only bring students to campus, with that important outreach that the admissions team does, but it also lends an opportunity to develop some partnerships so that our students know that they have layers of support. When they walk out of my office, being in first generation programs, they know that they can walk over to the Office of Inclusion and they can see somebody who looks like them and who believes in them and who will cheer them on and get them connected to resources. If they have questions about financial aid or they have any concerns, they know that I can turn them over to Nancy, even though that's not really her scope, but knowing that she would be there to walk them over to our student service center, and then same thing goes on the faculty, on the academic side, knowing that there are other professors like Dr. T-Mark Montoya who are there to support students. And so I think it really allows us to really reflect on the ways that we can be supporting our students that is both intentional and meaningful, and that recognizes just how complex and awesome they are.
I thank you for sharing that, and I really thank you for sharing even your personal experience. You know, I too am not first generation. My mom is first generation. She attended the first extended learning campus program at the University of Laverne. And the difference for me is, you know, in a co-parenting household, when I was 6 years old, I went to my mom's college business class, right? And I sat there and I heard them describe the marketing capabilities of Pokemon. And so in my mind, it was never an option that I was not going to go, because I literally had already sat in a college classroom. And the fundamental difference between someone who has that experience, who knows someone, a parent who still reaches out to a professor, and someone who doesn't have that in their household is dramatic. And so I want to thank you, Becca, for all the work that you're doing for our comunidad, and for really being that first contact for the folks who don't have that, right? And who absolutely need that. That being said, I am the first generation of my family to sleep in a dorm room, right? And so I want to ask Jessica, who is our assistant director in residential engagement, right? First, if you could explain a little bit about, you know, how does HSI meld into dorm room life? Because that one obviously didn't click for me immediately, but also to answer the second question, I think almost a little bit kind of the important question is Flagstaff, right? I think I was in Flagstaff when the campus was not there, and it is definitively and distinctively a different place. Right? How do we bridge those gaps? How do we create comunidad and some of the things that some of our Latina students have been accustomed to in Phoenix and in Tucson up in that city? And how do we make that a place for them to, you know, reside in? I think you're still on mute. If we could, whoever's hosting the chat, if we could just send her the request on mute.
Yeah, I tried, Brandon. I don't. Sorry, Jessica. I'm not sure what the.
Well, Jessica, what I'll do here is, yeah, you need to type them in. Also, I'm going to pose a question to the larger panel, and if your audio comes back in, you know, we'll just defer immediately. So to the larger panel, and in the context, obviously we're at our NAU-TEN event. For those of you who are joining us maybe for the very first time, our NAU-TEN events are specifically geared to the graduates of the last 10 years. Again, I'm all about context. I took classes with T. Mark Montoya and positionality. The majority of alumni for Northern Arizona have graduated within the last decade or two. Don't quote me, but I'm pretty sure within this last decade or two is the significant bulk of our alumni. And that happens to correlate with the mass acceleration of minorities attending higher education. So to the panel, and given the context of who we're here and, you know, why we have these discussions, where do you think we can get alumni involved? Where do you think we can make these connections? Oh no, Jessica, did you come back on? Jessica, here. Okay, before we answer that question, Jessica, if you can, again, the question is, how does HSIs meld into residence life, and how can we build bridges in Flagstaff for the community?
Yeah, absolutely. So considering the new HSI designation, we've worked to establish some different practices for our processes. This includes having both English and Spanish documents available on our site. For move-in this year, we collaborated with the Student Affairs Division to wear Hablo Español buttons during move-in to assist families that are moving into the community. In respect to engagement opportunities, we've developed a variety of different trainings for professional and student staff to learn more about the Latinx heritage. And working with Latinx students specifically. We've been really diligent in our hiring practices to be mindful of how we're supporting candidates and helping them understand our goals as a university and department, and ensuring that those are parallel with the diversity strategic plan. I think some kind of actionable behaviors that we've had as we look at the student side is really evaluating our hiring processes. So remeasuring what is the GPA requirement, what does the university require, and how can we make sure that it's more accessible. We provide both free housing and meal plans to our student staff, which is like amazing in Flagstaff, but which student staff members do we attract in that role, and how are we intentional around our marketing efforts and supporting students as they navigate that like onboarding process?
And then could you describe just maybe a little bit about your role? What specifically things are you working on, or is there anything that has hit close to home now with this new status?
Yeah, I think some relevant reflections of visible identities and how that's important when you can see yourself in leadership. And I can reflect on working with Ulysses Campos. He used to work here a while back. I see some head nods, and him being a residence hall director in the building that I worked in. For us, as we look at our hiring practices for our full-time staff, this year we onboarded around 9 new staff members, and of those staff members, 4 of them are Latinx, and the additional 3 are falling into other categories in the BIPOC community, where all of them are coming from a spectrum of different experiences. So as we look at visible representation in our department, that's something that we're truly working to enhance. In providing the tools necessary to support students. So having some bilingual resources, as well as affinity group and spaces to kind of reflect on what are some actual behaviors we can make sure that are weaved into the processes that we have. As we look at anti-racism work, there's been a myriad of different trainings and actionable behaviors that have promoted some different DEI components. As we reflect on the diversity strategic plan for the university and the roadmap, we've been able to figure out how to pull from those components and add those to our strategic plan for our department. I think a large part is around retention and around trying to recruit. But as we look at the student experience, it's ensuring that our staff has the tools necessary to work with different communities. As we look at mental health, we respond to all of the mental health concerns on campus for university housing, and a lot of that stemming from imposter syndrome. As we look at first generation students and them and the confidence that they bring in, and the different levels of stress and anxiety that comes from being the first. So some different coaching that's involved, as well as working with counseling services to ensure that they understand kind of where students coming from, and providing language. I think as we reflect on the language that we have within university settings, even the term Latinx, yes, it is inclusive, but my mom doesn't know what that means. That's not a term that's adopted by folks from Mexico. They're not oh yeah, we're Latinx. And in the academic side, of course, that language is translated over. However, as we look at our documents and as we look at working with that community, how do we make sure that 1, we can explain what it is, but 2, also not label a student if that's not the way that they're wanting to identify. As we look at the spectrum of inclusion, I think that we fall into this idea of either we're on the spectrum of wokeness of going through all of these trainings and we're going to understand all of the things, but at the end of the day, we start to revert back because we judge people for not understanding things or not having access to that information. So I think one of the large practices that we have is normalizing information and making sure that we're providing tools and resources where if you don't understand something, there's a link to it. But also being able to navigate how accessible are those resources as we look at language accessibility, visibility, and just even having access to internet. So lots of kind of components. University housing is very multifaceted, but I think that there's a lot of intentionality working with students and just kind of coaching our staff around what are some resources that are applicable and what are some practices that are more archaic and not necessarily functional as we work with the student population.
Well, thank you so much for that. And, I want to echo your points on mental health, right? Because I think that's a topic that our community is still grappling with. I think that's a topic that, I'm very grateful we made great progress and great strides on that, but it's definitely one of the hurdles we're going to have to overcome in our push. With respect to everyone's time, there's a couple things that I did want to wrap up with. The very first and obvious one is an incredible amount of thanks to all of the panelists here today. I want to reaffirm what I said in the beginning, and that is that none of these programs are driven by people and their efforts and sometimes their passions, right? That as much as we have staff members on campus, these staff go above and beyond. And as personally, someone who is in the higher education realm and sees different forms of leadership and sees different forms of initiative, I am so proud of my alma mater, Northern Arizona University, and the place it has positioned itself to be a national leader in the DEI space. And that is not a joke. That is not hyperbole. That is simply a statement of fact. I am incredibly grateful for our new president, Jose Luis Cruz Rivera. For those of you who have not had an opportunity to peruse his Twitter account or play his Spotify playlist, which is fire, I highly suggest that you go listen to a recent podcast that came out. It's called Changing Hearts and Minds. It is on the Ed Up experience, and he spends quite a bit of time talking about his place moving from New York out to Arizona, his beliefs about where we are as an institution, and his vision of where we are going. Lastly, I do want to put out a special thank you to our Alumni Association for first and foremost, Kevin Abernathy, who has done an incredible job. It's been mentioned time and time again that none of this happens without collaboration. I did not know most of the panelists before this presentation, and Kevin really went above and beyond to grab people from their respective places to come to one place so that we could converse about this important topic. I thank Stephanie Smith, our Vice President of Alumni Engagement, for always being so incredibly supportive of these things. And I want to thank our board members, our President Carmel Malkovich, who I see, board member Jana Harper, for the continued support, because I can truly and honestly say that our vision and our focus as alumni is to create an NAU by all and for all. And that, as we continue along that road, that the Alumni Association and us as alums are in a position and a place where we want to partner, where we want to be an integral part of the success of the institution. And so whether that's you out there in cyberspace, looking at the Alumni Association, looking for your next event, ready to connect with us, whether you're a staff or faculty who wants to send an email to one of us board members, whatever we can do to continue to promote and project the project, that's what we're here for. And most of all, thank you all for joining us here today.
Thank you. Thank you, Brandon. You did an excellent job.
Thank you.
I would like to doodle that. I'm so sorry I was late, by the way. I had a work conflict, but I just appreciate all of your time and your expertise, and to all of our panelists today. This is a movement that I think as the board, to represent the board, that we are all very excited about, and we just appreciate all of your expertise. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks again, everybody. If you want to stick around and chat, feel free. I won't kick anybody off yet. And if you're interested in, we can help get this video out to you if you want to share it with colleagues or friends or classmates. It should be on our YouTube page. You can, if you reach out to alumni at NAU.edu, we'll help you get that video. But thanks so much, Brandon. It's great to see everybody.
Thank you all. I do have to run, but I truly do mean it with the offer, and I want to connect with all of you and the panelists and stuff. So I'll be sending out some outreach, and my little sister's on campus right now, she's a junior, so much more I feel very connected right now. And again, just thank you, and I hope our paths cross in the near future.
Thank you for having me,
Brandon.
Thanks, everybody.
Hey, Nancy, do you have a minute?
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, Jana just left. I was going to try and hold her too. She had asked a question about.
I answered it to her.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
Thanks. I was like, that's right up your alley. So
Yep.
Thanks, Nancy. We're good to see you today. Thanks for joining us. Is your husband doing all right?
Yeah, actually, I got to go check on him.
Okay, good. Well, I hope you guys are well.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Great job, Kevin.
Thank you, Kristen.
You're welcome. And we did get it live streamed, so yay.
Sweet. So it's there.
Now we know.